here today to talk to you about death. According to a report from the World Health Organization, despite enormous efforts on the part of healthcare providers, the global death rate still remains at 100%. In other words, we're all going to die. But talking about that is not something that we all do. Our society tends to avoid the subject. There are those for whom the four-letter word died is worse than any swear word. And if you read obituaries, you know what I'm talking about. You'll see phrases such as, he returned home, she went to sleep peacefully, instead of using the word died. I was curious about that, so I went on the internet and researched euphemisms for the word dead. I found over 200, and here are a few of my favorites. Good, you have some favorites too. The last one I kind of particularly enjoy because there's actually a coffin manufacturer who advertises their products as underground furniture. Even some healthcare providers are so superstitious about the D word that they fear the mere mention of it will bring on death sooner for a patient. Well, I'm here to attest, if that were true and I had the power to cause somebody's death simply by speaking to them about it, believe me, I'd seriously think about who I might want to talk with and who I didn't. Whether we're comfortable talking about death or not, we're all going to experience it. So having the courage to normalize it opens up a space where we can express our end-of-life wishes and have a better chance that those wishes will be honored. So today I'm going to review several decisions to consider about death and dying, and then after my presentation, I'll welcome your comments or questions. The first item is the death with dignity law. How many here are familiar with the law? That's pretty darn good. Adults who qualify and want to use the law have let go of the fear of talking about death because their suffering is far more frightening. None of us can possibly imagine that which we have never experienced. I've never been terminally ill with a few months to live suffering, so I don't know if I would ever consider the death with dignity law. But this I do know for certain. I want that choice, just in case. Countless studies have shown that having some control over one's pain helps reduce it. The death with dignity law is less about death than it is about autonomy. Terminally ill patients want independence and the ability to make their life's decisions and not be forced to a fate that for some is worse than death. Patients who qualify and have the medication experience a feeling of control which eases their anxiety and reduces suffering even if they don't take the medication. Advances in medicine in the past 70 years have dramatically changed how we die. Death used to happen quickly, simply because antibiotics didn't exist. I was just talking to my aunt a couple of days ago and was asking her about when her father died, my grandfather. He was in his 40s. He died from pneumonia after getting a virus, a cold. He was dead within 3 days. That doesn't happen these days very often, simply because antibiotics existed and they didn't during his time. 50 years ago, a mere 50 years ago, CPR and medicines to survive heart attacks didn't exist. In his book, Being Mortal, Atul Gawande provided powerful information on how medicine has taken away natural deaths and turned them into medical events, lengthening the dying process. When death comes quickly, there isn't a fight for autonomy. There was a time in our medical history when this law wasn't necessary. But advances in medicine have changed the way we die, making it longer and more painful. This law provides a balance to that. Before I review specifics on the Death with Dignity law, I'd like to share a little bit about my background so you can understand why I believe so strongly in this law. I spent a year of my life full-time focused on one goal, nothing else, but to get this law passed in Washington State. It was a promise that I had made to my husband, Randy. He was diagnosed with brain cancer at the age of 55. We knew his prognosis was grim. He had the type of brain cancer that actually metastasized down into the nervous system. So because of that, he had radiation to both his brain and his spinal cord at the same time, while simultaneously receiving 3 types of chemotherapy. The treatment was very harsh and created additional healthcare problems for him, and personality changes and regular emergency situations. Brain cancer is a very difficult disease to deal with, as there can be dramatic changes from day to day and sometimes from hour to hour. If the brain cancer doesn't kill the patient, the treatment will. Either way, either option, it's an ugly death. We joined a brain tumor support group early on. We became very close to the other members in the group, and then we watched as each one died. My husband witnessed the horrible death that was awaiting him. When he entered hospice, Randy was well aware that he represented a percentage of patients whose suffering cannot be managed by hospice. The brain cancer caused an inability to walk, inability to control his arms, legs, and fingers, double vision, loss of hearing, loss of speech, painful muscle contortions that caused his feet to curl into a tube, his arms to twist into a pretzel, and his chest to go into a tent position. You can't make your muscles do what his did. He felt the indignity of being in diapers. The tumor pushed his eyes from his skull so that he couldn't close them. He was allergic to morphine. He asked hospice for aid in dying. They said it was illegal to assist him, so he told them he wanted to move to Oregon, the only state at the time that had a death with dignity law. Hospice said he wouldn't survive the trip in order to get there and qualify. He was angry that he was forced to endure the horrible death that he feared and one he did not want me to witness. He was angry that those he loved in our brain tumor support group would have no choice but to also suffer in their dying. So he asked me to promise him that I would change the law in Washington State, and I promised him I would. After Randy's death, I was willing to do anything to fulfill that promise. I was a top signature gatherer in the state to get the initiative on the ballot. I did fundraising, speaking engagements. I debated the opposition in public forums. I conducted countless media interviews for TV, newspaper, and radio. I even went up against Martin Sheen in a TV commercial. On election day, I danced in victory with our former governor, Booth Gardner. It was the single happiest day of my life, even over and above my wedding day, because the final promise of my marriage had been kept. But it was too late for Randy. During the campaign, a filmmaker followed my efforts and included them in a documentary entitled How to Die in Oregon. Has anyone seen it? No, okay, great opportunity then for all of you. The film has won numerous awards, including an Emmy nomination. It won the Grand Jury Prize at the Sundance Film Festival, which is equivalent to Best Picture. It also won a humanitarian award. When I went to Sundance for its premiere, I got to meet the president of HBO Documentary. She said this is her single favorite documentary that she's ever produced. That's a big honor. It's been shown on HBO many times and has aired at film festivals all around the world. I still get emails from people in other countries wanting to contact me about the film. Its educational power has been recognized by teaching hospitals, universities, and medical institutions as a vehicle to educate healthcare providers and the public about end-of-life choices. 4 years after its premiere, it is still one of the top rented documentaries. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to find it on the internet. You can also rent it through Netflix. There are many safeguards in the Death with Dignity law and several steps to qualify. This information is available on Compassionate Choice's website. It's also back there at our table. The patient must be 18 years or older. They must be a Washington State resident, validated with a driver's license, voter card, or evidence of leasing or owning a resident in the state. They must have been diagnosed with a terminal illness and a prognosis of less than 6 months to live. The diagnosis must be confirmed by 2 doctors. The doctor making the initial diagnosis and prescribing the medication is called the attending physician. The doctor who confirms the diagnosis and prognosis is the consulting physician. The patient must be able to self-administer the medication to qualify. The patient must be mentally competent. If the patient is clinically depressed or deemed to have impaired judgment, the attending physician refers the patient for a mental evaluation. The patient must make both a verbal and a written request to their attending physician. There's a specific form that's used, and it's available on the Department of Health's website and also through Compassionate Choices of Washington. The written request must be signed by 2 witnesses, one of whom cannot be a family member or an heir. The doctor cannot be a witness, but an employee at their office can be one of the witnesses. The attending physician is required to recommend to the patient that they discuss their wish with their family. But as with all healthcare issues, the patient is not obligated to do that, although we do encourage patients to talk with their family about their wish. The patient must then wait 15 days after the initial verbal and written request and then make a second verbal request. So after completing all 3 of these requests, there's then a 2-day waiting period before the medication can be called into a pharmacy. The patient can rescind their request at any time. They don't have to ever take the medication, and many never do, dying from their underlying disease instead. There are other options for terminally ill patients other than the Death with Dignity law, which include voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, which is what my husband did, but it still took him 2 weeks to die because he was very healthy otherwise. You can also refuse unwanted medical treatment or discontinuing life-sustaining treatment, which can include antibiotics. Infections are very common at the end of life, and antibiotics keep people alive longer, but many patients aren't told that. One of the many safeguards in the law is extensive reporting requirements by the doctor to the Department of Health. Each year, the Department of Health reports on their website usage on the law, but they don't identify information that would, or provide information that would identify the patient, the kind of information that's protected under HIPAA laws. Most patients fall in a category similar to my husband Randy: educated, with health insurance, married, dying and in hospice, dying from cancer. Statistics aren't yet available for 2013 on the department's website, or 2014 on the department's website, but I can tell you that in 2013, there were 173 prescriptions written and 119 patients used the medication. That is a tiny percent of the over 6 million adults in Washington State. But for those few people that are dying in pain, this law means everything to them. The law has other levels of protection, which includes life insurance. The death certificate will show the underlying disease, so life insurance is paid out and unaffected. In Randy's case, if he had been able to use the law, his death certificate would still have shown that he died from brain cancer. Another level of protection under the law is that no healthcare provider can be held civilly or criminally liable or professionally disciplined for helping a patient. A healthcare organization can prohibit their employees from assisting patients on premises, but they cannot legally prevent an employee from helping a patient off premises or off hours. They also cannot prevent an employee from providing basic information about the law if a patient requests it. Catholic hospices, which do not support the law, will still provide hospice care even if a patient has requested a wish to use it. Providence, which is the largest Catholic hospice in Washington, was wonderful in providing care for Randy in spite of what few options they had for him in terms of managing his suffering. I volunteer for them too. They know I go around and speak about this law. From my experience, a majority of hospice employees, whether they work for a Catholic hospice or not, support the law, but that may not be apparent if their employer is restricting what they can do on premises. I want to define some terms that some people erroneously use related to the law. Language matters, so I hope you will strive for accuracy in the words you use. The death with dignity law is not euthanasia, which we oppose. Euthanasia is the injection of a lethal dose of medication by the doctor with the sole purpose of ending someone's life. It's illegal. It's a felony. Under the death with dignity law, the doctor cannot administer the medication. The patient has to be able to self-administer to qualify. Another erroneous term used in connection with this law is palliative sedation. This is not palliative sedation. The Catholic Church, which opposes the law, supports palliative sedation even if it ends a patient's life, as long as that was not the intent. Compassionate Choices of Washington also supports palliative sedation if that's the patient's wish. Like euthanasia, palliative sedation is administered by the doctor and is not self-administered by the patient as required in this law. Doctors have used palliative sedation to help patients in their dying long before this law ever existed, and still do in some places where this law isn't available. Another term, the most egregious one of all, is physician-assisted suicide. That is also a felony. This is not physician-assisted suicide. It's not legally or medically suicide. Suicide is the act of a mentally ill person who wants to die, even though they have the choice to live. To qualify for the death with dignity law, you have to be terminally ill, and you cannot be mentally ill. Patients want to live, but they don't have that choice. So instead, they just want to shorten their dying pain. The term suicide is hurtful to patients and their families. It's inaccurate and it's pejorative. Under this law, life insurance is paid out. Life insurance companies will not pay if someone has committed suicide, so they recognize the term is inappropriate. The correct term is aid in dying. I've known people who qualified and wanted to use the law but were unable because they waited too long to have a discussion with their doctor about end-of-life issues. In delaying death discussions, patients might discover their doctor doesn't support the law or may support it but isn't willing to prescribe. The patient is then left with trying to find a new doctor at a time in their life when they have little time left. So when should an individual have end-of-life discussions with their healthcare providers? Today. Today. Even before you have a diagnosis of a terminal illness, so that you know in advance whether your doctor supports all your end-of-life wishes, regardless of what they may be. But you might consider asking your primary physician or your specialist if he or she supports the law and whether they would prescribe if a terminally ill patient of theirs requests this choice. And let me point out, those are two very different questions on whether they support the law and whether they would prescribe. because many doctors say yes, they support the law, but they're not willing to prescribe. The doctor, however, might be willing to be a consulting physician for another doctor in their practice who would serve as the attending physician, the one who prescribes. That's actually the case with my primary care physician. She isn't willing to prescribe, but another doctor in her practice is. She's willing to be a consulting physician. I never would have known that if I hadn't been willing to have an end-of-life discussion with her. There are helpful forums on Compassion Choice of Washington's website on how to approach death discussions with your doctor and with your family. Talking about death is the first step toward having any of your end-of-life wishes honored. And I'm aware that Regents recently approved reimbursing doctors for these discussions if they actually have specific training in palliative care or continuing ed. This brings me to an important aspect of end-of-life discussions with your doctor, and that's an advanced healthcare directive and durable power of attorney for healthcare. Even though 95% of adults say they know what an advanced directive is, only about 30% have completed one. So in this room, how many have already completed an advanced directive? Well, you're over the 30%, but not a lot. So we're hoping by the time you leave this seminar, that will change. The downside of not completing an advanced directive is prevalent in the cases of 3 young women, Karen Ann Quinlan, Nancy Cruzan, and Terry Schiavo. Their persistent vegetative states continued at a high cost medically and legally because these women didn't have advanced directives. Their families and healthcare providers were left guessing and not agreeing about what they would want, and thus the legal battles ensued. These young women are excellent examples why everyone over the age of 18 should complete an advanced directive. No one knows when they might suddenly be in an emergency situation, medical situation, maybe a car accident, something else, maybe hit on the head, who knows what, unable to communicate. An advanced directive communicates your wishes if you cannot. If you return to consciousness and are able to effectively communicate, the advanced directive goes dormant until such time that you may be unable to communicate again. There is an advanced directive and durable power for attorney for healthcare in the packets back there, and the forms are also available on our website free of charge. I'll get to your questions if that's okay, thank you. If you don't have access to the internet, let us know. We'll send the forms to you. There's a sign-up sheet back there. Unlike most advanced directives, ours includes in the document the durable power of attorney for healthcare, and that can make completion a little bit easier. Also in our advanced directive is a 2-page values worksheet that can help you decide what's important to you. And the answers to those questions should be shared with your healthcare representative so that they can be a better advocate for you. Choosing your healthcare representatives is possibly the most important part of healthcare decisions and end-of-life decisions. They should be people you trust to have your best interest at heart, who understand your wishes and will act accordingly. They should be comfortable with candid conversations about medical issues, including death. You don't want any wallflower. They don't have to be a family member, and in some cases that could be preferable to alleviate arguments or guilt that may surround a serious illness or death in a family. I'm actually a healthcare representative for several people who are not related to me. You can choose someone different for your advanced directive than who you choose for your durable power of attorney for finances. It's okay, and sometimes there's advantages to that. An advanced directive should be re-examined periodically. As our lives change, sometimes our wishes change. I did an advanced directive 10 years ago. I've recently redone it because I have different feelings now about what I want at the end of my life. So an advanced directive is not necessarily a static document to be completed once and never returned to again. There are many advanced directives available out on the internet. but they're not all equal, so I encourage you to do some research before deciding which one you want to use. We've done a comparison of ours to two of the more popular ones, one that was created by the National Death Act, that's the one commonly used in hospitals, and another one that's created by the 5 Wishes. Let me point out some differences. The National Death Act Advance Directive is limited to terminal conditions, whereas the 5 Wishes and Compassionate Choices of Washington's Advance Directives apply to both terminal and non-terminal conditions. The National Death Act has no provision for dementia, but both the 5 Wishes and Compassionate Choices of Washington do. A downside to the 5 Wishes is that they charge a fee. We do not. Another factor to consider with the 5 Wishes is that in the document is an anti-choice statement that can create an internal conflict and prevent your wishes from being honored if that statement is not specifically crossed out. So if you decide to use the 5 Wishes or have used it, I encourage you to exercise caution in really reading that statement. Compassionate Choices of Washington also created an advance directive that is specifically for Alzheimer's or dementia patients. We're honored that it's been endorsed by the Alzheimer's Association. By the age of 85, half of us will have dementia or Alzheimer's. So this advance directive is a very important document. It's comprehensive and well worth completing. There are copies back at the table. Your advance directive isn't very helpful if the information in it isn't being shared. So give a copy to your doctor and talk about it. Review it with your healthcare representatives that you choose and talk about it. They should also have a copy of the document. It's also a good idea to keep a copy in your glove compartment in case you have a car accident or in your suitcase while traveling. Stuff does happen when you're traveling to some people. So when you leave this seminar, I hope that by the time that you don't let too much time go by, and then in a week from now you've completed all these documents and that you've got all your ducks in a row just like I've done. That's my goal for all of you, and I hope you accomplish this. And after you've completed your documents, you can actually store them electronically on the U.S. Living Will Registry. For a nominal fee, they will provide a wallet card with instructions to healthcare providers on how to access your documents in the event you are unconscious and cannot give them information about your healthcare representatives. Ensuring your end-of-life wishes are honored has become a serious matter with the increase in hospital mergers with religious institutions. I'll just make a disclaimer here. My husband and I were both raised Catholic, but unfortunately the Catholic Church is the single greatest barrier in honoring end-of-life wishes. Many healthcare facilities in Washington State are now owned by religious institutions. Because of that problem, and it can be a problem, Compassionate Choices has included in the Advance Directive an authorization that functions as a directive to transfer the patient and their care to a facility that will honor the patient's end-of-life wishes if they happen to go to a religious-owned facility that refuses to honor those wishes. As part of decisions surrounding death, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of hospice. We have a forum on our website that can help patients decide which hospice is best for them, because they're not all the same. It includes questions such as asking the hospice's policy on resuscitation, hydration, antibiotics, palliative sedation, and what out-of-pocket expenses can be anticipated. Hospice is a tremendous benefit, especially when it's utilized sooner rather than later. And contrary to what some people might believe, doctors are actually human, which means many of them are just as uncomfortable talking about death as their patients. In Randy's case, that was true. We brought up hospice to his oncologist. She did not, because she viewed hospice as a failure to save his life. But because Randy and I had the courage to talk about death and dying, We initiated the request for hospice. And I say we because hospice serves the patient and the entire family. When someone contacts Compassionate Choices of Washington about a terminally ill patient, one of the first questions we ask is whether the patient is under hospice care. Not seeking hospice is just another example of how society avoids talking about death. According to the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, in 2010, the mean length of time nationally that terminally ill patients were in hospice was 19 days. The average was far less, and for those who have used hospice care for a family member, you can appreciate that 19 days is not much and is not as beneficial as it could be if hospice had been used longer. On the other hand, in 2011, the average length of time in hospice for terminally ill patients in Washington state was 52 days as compared to the national 19 days. That is one of the side benefits of the Death with Dignity law that was unexpected. It increases end-of-life discussions, which in turn increases hospice use and as a result improves end-of-life care regardless of whether someone uses the law or not. Compassionate Choices of Washington is the steward of the Death with Dignity law to ensure it is protected and not undermined by the opposition. But we are much more than that. We are much more than the Death with Dignity law. We're a volunteer-based nonprofit organization committed to helping terminally ill patients whether they want to use the law or not. We have been nationally recognized for our commitment in advocating for better pain management and for patient-directed end-of-life care. We assist with many end-of-life issues. We provide end-of-life planning documents and free end-of-life counseling serving hundreds of patients statewide every single year. We facilitate discussions between patients, physicians, and family members about end-of-life care and decisions. We make referrals to hospice providers, pain specialists, social service agencies, support groups, and bereavement care. We educate healthcare providers, lawmakers, and the public about end-of-life issues. We are committed to explaining all options for helping Washington State adults have a humane and peaceful death. Our goals are simple: that no one dies in pain, that no one dies alone, and that there is never a fee for our services.